It's time to make your life a little better.
Kris Schoels is here with real talk relationship tips that could save your love life.
Relationships go through many different stages. They change over time, and despite how it appears on TV and in the movies, they can take a lot of work.
Well, our next guest, like many, feel that communication is the #1 ingredient to a successful relationship. And here to take us through the stages is founder of thechicwife.com, Kris Schoels. Welcome back.
Hi, thanks for having me.
This is true. It takes a lot of work to be in a marriage, to be in a partnership, and there's different stages for each one that you've talked about and you've come up with. So the first stage is what?
Well, I just feel like, firstly, like you said, communication is key. People spend more time, I think, designing wedding invitations and picking out cakes and worrying about seating charts than they do maybe really talking about what's going to happen afterwards. So I think kind of the first stage is, are they the person for me? And I know for me, it was really important that I found somebody that was my best friend and somebody that I wasn't afraid to disagree with. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, but it just means that you can be yourself with that person. Like, my husband is my best friend. I mean, do you guys kind of agree?
Oh, no, for sure. And there's also that sort of like swept up in it romance phase of any relationship. And you can't make a good decision, I don't think, at that point about whether you're a lifelong partner with somebody.
Exactly. It's like somebody that sees you kind of at your worst, when you're crying, when you're grumpy. If they still love you after that and after my bad reality TV marathon, then you're meant to be.
Were you guys friends first? Like, my husband and I were friends for years first, and then we started dating afterwards.
We were, actually. We knew each other probably for a year before we started dating. And I think, like you said, JD, you can get swept up kind of in the romance and all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, if they can see you in your sweatpants and they're still your best friend, then you're meant to be. And that kind of moves into the next step of getting married and maybe things that you should talk about before, like we said about communication. I think that there's a few things that are kind of not deal breakers, but kind of.
Or things that you should at least communicate about when things get serious.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for us, my husband and I, talking about whether or not we were going to have kids was the very first conversation that we had. And I think we had that sooner than most people, but that's really important. I mean, did you guys know?
Did you talk about kids with your husband?
I think I don't remember, honestly, having a sit-down conversation, but both of us were under the understanding that we both came from pretty large families, and we both eventually wanted kids, but it wasn't like a 5 or 10 year plan, like we're going to get married, we're going to have a kid by this age, and that sort of thing.
But you at least like knew.
But we knew we were on the same page. Yeah, absolutely.
And then I also think, like you said, in the 5 or 10 year kind of thing, talking about future plans, where you want to end up. Like, if I wanted to end up, you know, on a farm, maybe where I grew up, and my husband always saw himself living in New York City in 5 to 10 years, then that's kind of an issue. And not an issue, but something that you should discuss before. Whereas if you get to 5 or 10 years down the road and then you're like, it's time to move to the suburbs, and your partner's like, wait, we didn't discuss this. I think it can also become a problem. And then, you know, the last thing, or not the last thing, but money.
Money's a huge issue for couples, Yeah,
and I think a lot of people, it's okay to not have it all figured out before you get married, but to at least like open the lines of communication. And then the last thing is actually household duties, which I know sounds crazy, but it's like, if you have it split up right away, who's doing the bills, who's doing this, who's doing that, I think it takes away a lot of the later arguments that can kind of come up.
We still have to figure that out in our household. Yeah, it's like, why am I always vacuuming? Why am I always doing this stuff? Yeah, that's the one thing.
My wife has used the phrase, am I the only one that can put toilet paper on the roll? Apparently I'm the only one with that skill.
It's like 11 years later, it's like, really? You can't find the
dishwasher? I don't understand.
I mean, come on.
But that's kind of silly stuff, but it's things, that's what people argue about the most. And, you know, if you have it worked out before, I don't want to say you have to have like,
do you literally want to put together a spreadsheet of like, okay, you do the dishwasher, I do the...
I am a neat freak, and I call my husband, love him, but he is the Tasmanian devil. So it's like, but I know that's what I like to do. I like to straighten things up. He doesn't so much. I kind of keep him out of my kitchen space, but he likes to do other things that I don't necessarily like, light bulbs and, you know,
hanging
things like
pictures
that.
And things like that. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's kind of like decide what you don't mind doing, because then later down the road, you're not going to have these crazy arguments over who didn't take the trash out, who messed up on a bill that month. So it's stuff like that.
But those seem to be kind of traditional type roles too. What about non-traditional? Like say, you know, you're off working and he's sort of the stay-at-home dad or just the stay-at-home husband.
Or works from home even.
Yeah, I think, again, it's just about communicating. I mean, I don't think everyone's going to have all the answers right away, but I think if you talk about things as opposed to sitting on something that's really bothering you, I think people just stop communicating with each other. I mean, we've been married now about 7 years, and every day I have to keep in mind, like, if you're upset about something, talk about it. Because then that little thing will turn into something massive.
Huge,
and then, you know, the third stage relationship, which I think all of us are kind of in this part, which is like, how do you keep the spark alive, you know? Day in, day out, the laundry's got to get done, the toilet paper roll's got to get changed. How do you keep the romance alive?
All the glamorous stuff.
So glamorous.
You know, I think it's about remembering to take care of each other. And that could be something as little as like making coffee in the morning. Like every morning, I make sure my husband has a cup of coffee. Tells him that I care about him before he goes out the door. Seems silly. Taking time to date, which is also really important. We don't have kids, but especially if you do, taking, even if it's one night a week, something easy, taking the time to date. And then my grandfather actually, he married us, and before he would pronounce us husband and wife, he leaned in and he said to us, my key to a successful marriage is that I've never gone to bed angry. And it, again, seems so simple. And even if you need to take a break from an argument, I have always made sure that we don't go to bed mad at each other, because then you pull the problem into the next day.
And you want to squash it that day. But are you guilty of that?
I've gone to bed angry, I'd be lying if I said I didn't go to bed angry.
I've done it too.
Sometimes it's like, well, you know what, it's better to go to bed angry than continue this fight, because it's just going to get worse.
The stubborn German in me, for sure, it's happened.
Thank you, Kris.
Good tips. Thank you so much. Good to see you. We'll be right back.